Welcome to Planted, finding your roots in STEM careers. Journey with us as we navigate the winding path into plant-related careers with professionals who have taken root or are still branching out. I'm Megan Wiesbrook.
And I'm Jessica Turner-Scoff.
Today, let's talk about how to choose between multiple opportunities, internships, or life choices within a career. We are joined today by two guests, both who've had to make some tough decisions along their career path, but they have overcome and succeeded. First, let's start with Dr. Murphy Westwood. Murphy, how are you doing today?
Fine, thank you.
Now, Murphy, I understand that through you, England, international travel, and the Christmas tree have a lot in common, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But first, since you are the director of the Global Tree Conservation Program at the Morton Arboretum, can you give us your elevator speech of your job?
So I lead the Arboretum's International Tree Conservation Initiatives, and our goal is to save tree species from extinction through global collaboration. So I run a team of 5 people. We have a broad portfolio of projects and initiatives that we work on to prevent tree species extinction. So we work to identify and prioritize the species that are of most conservation concern, so the most threatened species. And then we identify the most urgent and effective conservation actions that are needed to protect these species in the wild. And we focus in a few key areas in the world that have a lot of species diversity, namely in Mexico and Central America and in Southeast Asia. So we have some really valuable botanical garden and conservation partners in those regions where we have on-the-ground projects to protect threatened trees in those areas.
It sounds like you get to travel all over the world with multiple conservation projects for trees in a lot of different places. Can you tell us a bit about your career path before it was on a much more global scale?
My education started with my undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and that was in environmental science. And then I did my master's and my PhD in England. My master's was at Imperial College in London, and my PhD was at Cambridge University, and those both focused on plant science and evolution. And then my employment history is I've done university lecturing. I've been a scientist at an agricultural research company. And then about 5 years ago, I started at the Morton Arboretum in our Science and Conservation Department.
So we see your connection with international travel as well as with England. But can you tell us a little bit about what the Christmas tree has to do with anything?
Well, one of the more interesting and I guess kind of unexpected little factoids that I discovered as I became much more embedded in tree conservation is that America's favorite Christmas tree, the Frasier fir, is actually one of the most endangered tree species that we have that's native to our country.
So why is it endangered?
Well, several years ago, an invasive insect pest, the balsam woolly adelgid, was introduced to the Frasier fir's natural range area, which is around Appalachia, and this little bug has basically been decimating our native Frasier fir population over a few decades. And we don't have a feasible way of controlling it in the wild. At places like Christmas tree farms and nurseries, they can manage for the bug, but in the wild, we can't really do anything about it. So it's one of the tree species we're more concerned about.
So is the pest a lot like the emerald ash borer or the Dutch elm disease, things that we've seen historically wiping across the United States?
That's right. It's a good example of an invasive pest or disease that's really wreaking havoc on our native species here.
Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about how you choose between different opportunities and really navigate a career when there's a lot of different things that you can say yes to or say no to, especially with internships and jobs and everything like that. But before we dive in completely, I want to introduce Trinity Pierce, who is the Woodland Stewardship Program Coordinator at the Morton Arboretum. Hello, Trinity. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Trinity, as the Woodland Stewardship Program Coordinator, it sounds like you get to be outside and work with people. Can you give us a sentence or two about your role?
Absolutely. I do coordinate the Woodland Stewardship Program, and that allows anyone interested to take courses in restoring natural areas in their communities, participating in holistic, sustainable management. Spending time outdoors, absolutely. I get to listen, work alongside some of our dynamic volunteers. I also get to participate in outreach, finding potential partners who may be interested in offering these courses to their own folks.
Trinity, could you define for us what you mean by holistic management strategies when working in the natural area?
Absolutely. So the ecosystems around us are incredibly complex. We don't understand all the interactions that go into these high-quality areas. So as much as possible as restorers, we humbly and respectfully try to understand all the components involved. It can't just be cutting invasive plants. It can't just be planting natives. It's all working together moving forward.
And what are examples of some of the interactions? Like, are you talking about soil? Are you talking about, like, animal species? Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yes, there's so many variables that go into restoring these spaces. We have to factor in climate. We need to factor in soil. We're factoring in what historically was present in terms of native plants. And now with a warming climate, some of these plants are actually migrating. They need to move out of these areas. So there is a lot that goes into this.
Trinity, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and describe your career path? And I know that you have a connection between Disney World and birds, and can you just kind of connect the dots for us on that?
Absolutely. Growing up, you would normally find me out and about in the natural world. I have a huge imagination. I thought I was in off-planet sci-fi stories, but as I grew older, I realized it was more the natural areas that I was connecting to. And there's so many incredible species right in front of us that I wanted to learn more about. Growing up with that imagination, Disney World seemed to be the mecca. That's where I was going to go. And as I realized I liked plants, I wanted to get more into horticulture.
And can you just tell us what horticulture is really quick?
Absolutely. Horticulture is the science and art of growing plants, often associated with greenhouses. And as I learned at Disney World, where we were maintaining and pruning a lot of roses, on the Rose Walk, for example, in Epcot, if you've been there, but also taking care of plants from seed all the way to maturity, there was a huge control factor that I hadn't necessarily expected, but is necessary. But I realized I wasn't as happy in the greenhouse as I was out and about. And it was working at Audubon that allowed me to see birds as these fantastical creatures that exist in our own reality.
Wow, so it sounds like an internship at Disney World in horticulture and an internship at the Audubon Center with birds is two choices that you had to make in your career path, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So why don't we jump right in? I'm going to start somewhat at the beginning, though. So, Murphy, I'm just curious, when you were in high school, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
Well, an English major. So I didn't really realize that a career in science or being a scientist, and especially being a plant scientist, was really an option for, something you could do for your whole life. So when I was in high school, I did really well. I did well in English. And then my senior year, my high school offered for the very first time a new AP course in environmental studies. And I thought it sounded interesting, so I signed up and I really enjoyed it. And so when I went to Michigan to my undergrad degree, I still maintained that I thought I would be an English major, but I was drawn to all of the environmental science and ecology and botany classes in the School of Natural Resources at Michigan. So I did not, actually end up taking that many English classes in college. And by the time I had to declare my major formally at the end of my sophomore year, my academic advisor looked at my transcript and said, "Murphy, you haven't taken any English classes. I think maybe we should switch you into the School of Natural Resources." And I'm very grateful that she did say that.
Wow, it's great to hear that sometimes, even not knowing, but just taking the classes that you find the most interest in can eventually lead you right into the path for you to be ultimately where you need to be and find what your passion is. Trinity, what about you?
In high school, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I knew there was this sense of working outdoors with the land, and on the horizon was a liberal arts degree. But how could I transform that into a career? And so moving forward, I realized it was our historical relationship with the land that I really appreciated. And so I moved into a history major.
Great.
So how did you choose each next step, especially after leaving college? Like, what opportunities were you looking for in your career? How did you link your interests to the actual job market? And how did you choose between your options? And Murphy, why don't you tell us first?
Well, having finished my degree in environmental science at Michigan, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but I wasn't exactly sure where or when. And so I thought I might take a year off between undergrad and going to get a master's. My parents gave me a 2-week vacation in England as a graduation present, and I went over to London, and what started as a 2-week vacation, I ended up living there for 10 years. So I don't think that was part of their plan when they gave me this gift, but I got to London, and I was staying with some family there, and I discovered that Imperial College had a master's degree that was starting in the fall that focused on advanced methods in taxonomy and biodiversity, which is basically a fancy way of saying the study of naming and describing plant and animal species. It's basically the way taxonomy is the way that we identify and describe all of the diversity of life that we see around us. And I just thought that sounded exactly like what I wanted to do. So I had already missed the deadline for applications. So I went every day to the admissions office for like 2 weeks and just basically pestered them and begged them to let me on the course, and they did. And that was probably one of the defining moments, because the program was taught in the Natural History Museum in London, which is one of the coolest natural history museums in the world. And it really solidified my interest in learning more about plants and plant diversity and biodiversity and conservation too. I wanted to work to protect that. So being exposed to that sector and to the experts and the course there really sent me down this path towards plant conservation.
So Murphy, it sounds like persistence as well as kind of following, your interest and what really speaks to you, was a great next step in your career. I know sometimes that can be hard to kind of, abandon the linear path that you thought you were going to take and kind of go down, the road into really following your passion. But I can understand why that was definitely a turning point for you in your career. Trinity, can you tell us a little bit about, after you left college, what were you looking for next in next opportunities to take the next step in your career?
I also took a year off after college, still discovering, learning what it was I was most passionate about and could make a career out of. And I kept coming back to our relationship with the land. I was most at home in these natural areas, and I was able to discover a master's program in landscape architecture at the University of Michigan, 3-year if you didn't have a design background, which I didn't, because I had no clear idea that maybe landscape architecture was the way forward. And that's where then that Disney World internship came in, being able to try out horticulture as an aspect of landscape architecture.
So that's a really nice segue, especially with, talking about Disney World as an internship. And I know you had the internship at the Audubon. So what did you look for in an internship? What made you say, yes, this is where I'm going to be spending a couple months or a year or whatever?
So absolutely, those internships were key in helping me to further define what I was interested in. And initially, with my imagination aspect, it was location. It was adventure of being in new areas I'd never been in before. And along with that, then, this idea that maybe I could be a landscape architect or I could be in horticulture was visualizing myself in this position, in these fields. And that was finding keywords of positions I could have.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because it sounds like what you were doing is looking for dream jobs in the future and then looking to see how you could make your background line up so that in the future you could be a candidate for one of those jobs.
Absolutely. Dream jobs suddenly seemed more realistic. And then there were all of these internship opportunities through school or otherwise where I would find those keywords, where I could actually investigate short-term some of those foundational skills for those now attainable jobs.
So, Trinity, it looks like when you're evaluating some of these internships and looking for the skills that you want to develop, that you're almost essentially taking a risk on some of these internships and the skills and the opportunities that they're going to provide. And Murphy, it sounds like a lot of things have taken a lot of persistence in, getting the next step, as well as coincidence. Is sometimes when making these decisions about the next step, does it ever come down to like a pro-con list? Is it more of a gut feeling, or, how do you jump into that risk?
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes it is very much about a location. Sometimes it's about a particular point that you are in your life in terms of, your family and maybe your partner. How are you going to decide where to go when perhaps you're being drawn to different cities or different countries? And then sometimes it's just opportunistic. An incredible opportunity arises. For my PhD, for example, the main reason I took the PhD project I did was because it offered 2 months of field work in South Africa, which I just thought sounded like a lot of fun. So I've kind of had to sort of choose across those different drivers at different points, whether it's a degree or it's a job opportunity. Often a pro-con list does help a lot, but I think, ultimately the gut feeling really is generally the right answer from what I found. That being said, I don't think that there are very many times in your career where you'll say, oh my gosh, I really regret doing this job, because I think that every job, every internship, every experience really does help you kind of refine what it is you want to do and what it is you don't want to do. And, the jobs that you don't like can be very valuable to say, wow, I've learned my lesson there. I'm not going to pursue that path anymore.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I know that it took me being a zookeeper to realize that plants are way, way cooler than animals. So, Trinity, are there any other factors that play into your career choices, such as, family, personal goals, anything like that?
I think personal goals have been huge in how far they've come. Initially, they were very vague. Want to work outside. It seems silly, but that's critical in building the foundation of what you're most passionate about, what you really want to do in life. And then with your experience, you build on those, you define them, and once again, I can visualize myself once I've accomplished those goals in this field.
It's interesting because I really get that theme of your imagination really helping drive your career, and it's really cool to listen to.
So one last question on the topic for both of you, and Trinity, we'll put you on the spot first. What advice do you have for somebody who's undecided and they have to choose between two opportunities?
It's having that pro and con list. It's personal goals, no matter how vague, and realizing, what do you want to get out of this right now? Do you have short-term goals? Again, they may be basic, but that's how you get started. And that has really helped me, and even internships after getting a degree. This is a great way to hone in on experiences, visceral experiences that you can put on your resume.
So Murphy, what advice would you have?
I would just say, don't be too paralyzed by choice. Your whole career is going to be full of choices, millions of them. And I think it can be very scary and intimidating. And I've been in this position a million times where I think, is this really going to throw off the trajectory of my whole career? And in fact, you can take career tangents. You can, try something out, see how you feel. And if you need to go back to the course you were on before, you can always readjust. So, I would say go with your gut. And if an opportunity sounds great and it works with all of the, great advice that Trinity just gave about having pro and con lists and sticking to your goals, give it a shot, because you won't regret it and it'll help you, kind of hone that path in the long term.
So we also have some questions from a few teachers who are interested in knowing a few things from each of you. And I know that no day is necessarily typical, that, the day before doesn't look like the day after. But can each of you give us what a typical day may look like in your current role?
Absolutely. So there's essentially the two parts to my role, the being able to be outside with volunteers, checking in on them and their restoration work. And then I'm also doing the outreach. So building relationships with potential partners all around our great woodland stewardship program course curriculum.
Great. And Murphy, what about you?
Well, I travel anywhere from 1 to 2 or even 3 months a year. So if I am out of the office, I may be in a botanical garden or an arboretum in some other country where we have a collaboration or an on-the-ground project that we're managing, or I might be at an international conference presenting a talk. If I'm in the office, I'm often running meetings with my team where we are checking in on projects that we're running. We might be writing a funding proposal so that we can bring in some support to start a new project. Or, I'm on conference calls with other collaborators, perhaps organizing a conference or a training seminar or symposium anywhere around the world.
Wow, it sounds like you guys are both pretty busy.
So we know that, you're probably not going into the career of working with plants to be millionaires, but it sounds like there's a lot of other really amazing perks with your job. So, starting with you, Murphy, how many countries have you been to right now, and what are some other things that you really love about your job?
Travel is definitely one of the main perks. I've been to 45 different countries in the world, and that has been one of the most gratifying aspects of the career path that I've taken, is to learn more about the people and the cultures, and especially the plants that are all over the world. So that has been a big perk for me. I know that's not a perk for everybody, but that has been one of the things I've really enjoyed. And then also just working, with really passionate people. It's just an amazing community. And also being able to go home at night and think to yourself that you've made a bit of a difference in terms of protecting, biodiversity and the natural world for humanity, for all of the other plants and animal species that rely on, that intricate web of nature that's out there. So it's a very gratifying career in general.
And what about you, Trinity? What are some of the perks about your job?
Well, certainly foremost working outdoors, and more recently recognizing and celebrating the volunteers I work with, that they're bringing these incredible experiences to the table, enriching our team, and together we can positively make a difference in our natural areas.
I love it. There's just so many associated perks with these jobs that you don't always think about, with being outside, working with people, travel. It's just really awesome.
I'm hearing a lot of passion in both of your responses. Passion for working outside, passion for being outside, passion for conserving critical species, and also working to protect and conserve trees and plants all over the world. One last question to both of you. What is your favorite plant? Why don't we start with you, Murphy?
Oh, it's so hard to choose. Well, one of my favorite trees is the Wolemni pine. It is a really kooky-looking tree. It looks like something Dr. Seuss invented. And in fact, it was thought to be extinct for millions of years. And it was rediscovered in a little valley about an hour outside of Sydney, Australia, just about 15 or 20 years ago. And, this is a tree that was growing when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And there's just one little population left outside of Sydney. And it's really a great poster child for the importance of conservation. So since its discovery, there's been a big conservation push to understand a lot more about the tree, understand the threats that are driving it towards extinction, and then also protecting it. And horticulture has played a really big role in that too. So botanical gardens all over the world now are growing Wolemni pines, and it's a great way to educate the public about the importance of trees and tree diversity. And in that respect, it's kind of one of my favorite underdog species right now.
And I love that it goes to show that plants are still being discovered.
Trinity, what about you?
Right now, I'd have to say witch hazel. Blooms in the winter, just incredible to be walking in the woodland and come across a shady area, and there's this gnarled shrub with these great yellow twisted petals. And the capsules expel seeds up to 20 feet, which is just the wonder of it is amazing. Not to mention the lore of human use, that forked limbs were actually used as divining rods to find wells, to find water underground. So an incredible friend of mine, an incredible plant.
Just thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, Murphy and Trinity. It's just really great to hear about people that are navigating all these opportunities, taking advantage of situations, and really making the world a better place. So don't forget to check out our resources, and you can learn more about Murphy, Trinity, and all of our other guests.
This episode of Planted, Finding Your Roots in STEM Careers, was made possible by the Morton Arboretum and Multimedia Services at College of DuPage. Check out additional resources and bonus content at www.mortonarb.org/plantedpodcast. This is Jessica Turner-Scoff
And Megan Wiesbrook.
and we hope you'll continue to join us as we journey into STEM careers.